A poor neighborhood in one of China's cities hid a dark alley where someone had made a mess. Our protagonist, Chang Zai-Kui, a very young lad of about 17 years old, stumbled upon the footprints of an imp that told him that the imp was somewhere nearby. His amazing ability was revealed while he was still an infant. Thanks to it, he could use the power of the collected traces at any time, as well as see what was hidden to other people. Having developed this ability, he had the ability to effortlessly gather traces of uncleanness, which he did right now. But his goal didn't end after that. He needed to know where this monster was. As soon as he thought about it, the fiend attacked him from behind, but he was lucky enough to be able to jump back in time. Apparently, the monster was hiding in the footprints themselves and was waiting for Chang Zai-Kui in ambush. There were even more footprints on the wall than on the asphalt. All these silhouettes were nothing but a hoax. Somewhere among them there had to be a real one. Carefully studying each silhouette through his senses, he found the one he wanted. As soon as the monster felt that it had been discovered, without expecting any action from Chang Zai-Kui, attacked first. Chang Zai-Kui had a good enough training to resist monsters of this rank. At the very least, he had managed to bind the fiend before it attacked him. Furthermore, after realizing the situation, the fiend decided to escape. When assessing his opponent, Chang Zai-Kui was also not ashamed to say that this girl was dangerous. Beautiful long legs loomed right in front of his face, making the young man more and more embarrassed. But his ability advised him to be more careful, for by doing so he was provoking the foul. The more irritated they were, the more dangerous. It was only a compliment, but the foul deemed them an enemy, so they immediately unleashed the power of the traces they had accumulated. The strength of these trails manifested in the form of tentacles. 4 long tangles emerged from one hand. They were long enough to reach the foul thing at a distance, and strong enough to grab its limbs and immobilize it. One could only hope that what Chang Zai-Kui did was not considered harassment, but he should have put those thoughts out of his head, because they were completely irrelevant at this moment. The fiend was stronger than Chang Zai had anticipated. Even while bound, it broke those bonds by breaking free from them. She was still trying to fight back, but the tentacles were also constantly regenerating, binding the monster tighter and tighter. But Chang Zai-Kui liked the way she stubbornly resisted. At the same time, he was contemplating on not looking like a complete rascal. It was exciting for him to interact with the monster girl so up close. So these thoughts confused him, thus putting him in an unexpected situation. Her tentacles pierced through Chang Zai-Kui's chest. Would this really be the end for him? He tried to catch the monster, but he ended up getting caught. The guy was acting too lightly and didn't expect the monster to have its own fighting techniques. Now he risks being eaten. It was this moment that made him wonder why this had happened, and why he had taken the job in the first place. What was he hoping to accomplish by doing it? Chang Zai-Kui was an ordinary high school student who went to school, well, ordinary. He had the ability to see. He could see something unusual, something that comes with fear. It was this feeling, fear, that Chang Zai-Kui felt once he saw his first monster. But he quickly realized that no one else could see them but him. If he told anyone, they'd think he was crazy. That fear of wonder which only he could enjoy alone, they beckoned him strongly. Despite the fact that he kept his secret, everyone thought he was strange, including his parents. There were advantages to this too, because he was allowed to rent a house for himself and live alone, and there was no question of coming on vacations. But here, instead of a monster, he met some footprints. The feeling was familiar to him, for those footprints were left by those creatures. That afternoon, he couldn't resist following those footprints, with the hope that someone was waiting for him in the alley. The thought that he might meet a new monster beckoned to him, and his expectations were indeed realized. He didn't even have any thoughts of killing them, but assumed that if he were in his place, any other human who had never seen such creatures would have undoubtedly massacred this monster for his own protection. There were no bad thoughts in Chang Zai's mind, but as it was, this handsome man was very scared of Chang Zai-Kui and ran far away like a child from a bad mother. This cute little octopus jumped into woman's arms as if hiding from the outside world. It seemed as if this girl was already waiting for him. She was extremely surprised that there was a person who could see monsters and not lose his mind. Was the guy really not scared? But this was a question he could not answer, for the beauty of this girl filled his eyes and he could think of nothing else but this. It was as if she was created out of ether, so light and vague, as if she could disappear at any moment. Even though she had closed her eyes, Chang Zai could still feel the gracefulness of her thoughts, as if she was woven from them. Even if Chang Zai-Kui was facing the most beautiful woman in the world, he should have remained steadfast, because the eyes could be deceived. But the painfully familiar uneasiness in his heart said one thing. She was definitely not human. The expression on Chang Zai-Kui's face could be read, so it wasn't difficult for the girl to realize that this man loved monsters. He was not interested in this girl. No matter how beautiful she was, he probably only wanted a job. This job would surely help Chang Zai-Kui contact more creatures. But wasn't that strange? In order not to mislead, the girl explained that she was looking for strays in the world of oddities to move them to a safe place. If Chang Zai is willing to take this job, he will have contact with many of them in the future. Of course, the girl was willing to provide the necessary support for the job, but as long as he did have the courage, he had the opportunity to accept this girl's proposal, and then they would be together. In such a critical situation, after rewinding the tape of the past backwards, he finally remembered why he took this job. His reason was to stop the monsters from living on Earth. After somehow waking up, he met his new employer, and no matter what she screamed, the important thing was that he was alive. Of course, the girl was not happy, for the guy was just lying on the ground and doing nonsense. She found it a negligent attitude to work. If he was really worried about the monsters, then he should save them the trouble. Chang Zai-Kui still hadn't really woken up and didn't fully understand who this girl was. In any case, she should have watched herself, because it was dangerous here. But it's not dangerous for her. But for Chang Zai, the only thing she didn't understand was why the guy hadn't warned her before. Because it was pretty dangerous here, and without her, he would have died a long time ago. While the girl was rescuing him, he was surprised to notice that the wound on his body chewed up rather quickly. The only thing he didn't like was that the scar would remain unsightly. Chang Zai-Kui assumed that that woman had sent a girl to help him, but he would have never even imagined that she would be so considerate. Before he could develop his thought, he had to realize that this girl held no responsibility in his dealings with the undead. The fate of all the monsters depended on Chang Zai-Kui and Blitz's skills, but their conversations were interrupted by a sudden catching up with the foulness. The girl's head hurt, to say the least, but that didn't mean she was dead. She was alive and conscious, but Chang Zai-Kui needed to focus on something else. He knew how to appease this wickedness. Victory was in their pocket. Chang Zai-Kui had managed to master a technique that was commonly referred to as the whispering of uncleanness. In this case, the whispers of the unholy should have helped him, but Monster was too impatient. Sticking her tongue out of her body, she was in a hurry to destroy her enemy. But in her haste, she didn't even notice how she stumbled over the thin threads she had tripped over. The threads bound her entire body. They were even like a sharp gum that could be stretched to any size, but at the same time, if it was pulled tighter, it would definitely hurt the monster. This was how Chang Zai-Kui absorbed the drops of anxiety and reconstructed them into weapons. Blitzkrieg is the first power he's gotten from the foul Blitz. These thin threads to me are just a flimsy web. They wing in themselves a tremendous power to ward off. His goal wasn't to kill the undead, for he just wanted to help. Without realizing it, the foul thing resisted more and more, but the more it did, the tighter the shackles bound it. But in the end, the flashes of excitement made the non-cleaner jump up, thus unraveling all the threads. It was dangerous because she was strong at large, but in Chang Zai's gaze, only boredom from what had happened counted. It was obvious to him that by breaking those threads, he would have no problem tying her up again. But she didn't realize it. He felt sorry for her, because so many scars were on her body, and that included her legs. It wasn't arrogant pity, but genuine sympathy. Before they met, Chang Zai found a space where the ground and walls were shrouded in anxiety. When the foul thing walked, it felt like it was walking on piercing gravel, like a barefoot figure staining the ground with blood. There might be others who were blind and didn't see it, or were simply indifferent. But Chang Zai-Kui saw it and couldn't ignore it. If he hadn't been attracted to this monster's behavior, he wouldn't have noticed this particular part of her. No one could feel her discomfort in this world, and no one could understand her pain, and certainly those bleeding wounds, no one could ever heal. But it didn't matter so much anymore because such a past was behind us. After all, now she will be able to return home, and there Chang Zai-Kui will be able to help her heal her leg wounds. This was probably the first time this monster felt cared for. Chang Zai-Kui knew that deep down, all monsters needed care. But the aggressive world never allowed them to show weakness. Who knows from which side you will be attacked? Everyone had already become friends, but the stranger was still puzzled as to what this unity meant.
She was furious. Why did he refuse the Blitz power? If that thing shoots fire, he'll be dead in seconds.
Why was he holding that monster like some kind of beloved girl anyway? These words greatly frightened the monster, but Chang Zai hurriedly calmed her down, for the girl was simply jealous of their newfound closeness. Be that as it may, the woman finally realized that Chang Zai-Kui's conversation with the whispering uncleanness was not bragging. This test proved without too many questions that Chang Zai-Kuei was worthy of the job. But the stranger was also an imp, but Chang Zai didn't seem to understand her feelings. The guy may have been a weirdo, but the woman, being wiser, asked the girl to give him some attention. Now that they had agreed on everything, the woman was ready to go with Chang Zai-Kuei to the netherworld, where there he would see them for real. It was a real pleasure for her to introduce Chang Zai-Kuei to the foulness, for he was worthy of it. Chang Zai-Kuei, in turn, could no longer wait to go to the unclean harem. Finally walking towards the exit, they could see their transportation that would take them instead of their destination. In fact, it would be hard to imagine either of these two women behind the wheel, but they learned pretty quickly to new adaptations. But only the girl was not going to drive this car, because there is no asphalt road to the world of uncleanness. No one was even supposed to learn how to drive, or even intended to learn how to drive, because it moved on its own. In fact, in order for that to happen, they were trained beforehand. This style of traveling was many times different from Chang Zai-Kuei's usual traveling style. Not to say he was uncomfortable, but rather the opposite. The journey evoked special feelings in him. Every cell of his body shuddered as the car floated and soared. Finally, when they arrived at the site, their car plunged into some sticky but resilient liquid. The girl climbed out of that car as if it were a piece of jelly, gradually and carefully pulling every part of her body out. But Chang Zai-Kuei, who was not used to such conditions, could not get out so elegantly and simply fell to the ground trying to pull his legs out. But before he could do so, he saw before him a veritable world of unholy things, where there were many creatures and plants unknown to him. He was delighted and felt like Alice in Wonderland when she entered an uncharted world. He was delighted by the fact that there were many adorable children in this place. But the stranger didn't appreciate his enthusiasm and thought he was some kind of twisted bastard. The situation between Chang Zai-Kuei and her ward did not change, so the woman decided to resort to human customs and offered to find a nice place to talk so that Chang Zai could more easily adapt to this world. The place they found was like a bar where the bartender to a six-armed creature was making everyone cocktails, barely having time to take orders. The interior here was indeed unusual, but there were still similarities with the real world, at least the cocktails made on Earth. The recipes used were the same, and so were the names. Entering the bar, the guests wanted to repeat the order. This place also had its own name. It was called Moonrise. Chang Zai-Kuei's employer is the Lord of the Moonrise. Her name was Jianren, but literally, the word meant nothingness. So the girl was asking to be called a lowlife. Why would she humiliate herself like that? But that name was a homonym, and it didn't mean literally that she was nothing. In addition, Jianren had never considered her name from the angle of human language. This name served as a constant reminder of her rejection. Almost all the local undead were aliens to this world. To humans, they were exiles from another world. They were also strangers to the old world, as strange and frightening as they were. One grave mistake could hurt everyone around them. The unclean didn't fit into any group because they were a disaster and misfortune for all of them. Instead of calling Moonrise a communal home, it was better to say it was a prison for the unholy. Jianwen had brought everyone here for a reason. She wanted to assign Chang Zai-Kuei the task of finding a place for the unclean to live permanently. After all, that way they could live peacefully at Moonrise. It was advantageous because a certain residence could guarantee the safety of the unclean, as well as the safety of the entire world. To Chang Zai-Kuei, this request was the truest trifle. For the most important thing for him was that no one should prevent him from getting close to the evil one. Chang Zai-Kuei had accepted this task so decisively that even Jianren was embarrassed. As much as she admired his talents, this child would be with him now, just in case. This cute girl was called Guan Shou. She was a born unclean. Lady Jianren had also given her an assignment to help with the administration. Guangshou still couldn't recognize Chang Zai-Kuei. He claimed to be a good judge of uncleanness. So the girl suggested that he try to figure out what her abilities and traits were. With her harmfulness, Guanshou reminded Chang Zai-Kuei of human women. And after all, this was indeed a strange trait for an imp. But wasn't this a call that Guangshou could get angry on behalf of all the women and nail Chang Zai-Kuei? But he preferred not to be defeated, so he decided to act first. Could grabbing her head and threatening Guanshou really defeat her? Chang Zai-Kuei didn't even think of fighting her. He wanted to show tenderness towards her with the hope that she would also be shown towards him. As for the other girls, Jianren pretended as if she didn't see anything, and like a child she looked down at one spot, and the unclean beasts became jealous. For some, this minute lasted like an eternity. But for Chang Zai-Kuei, it was purely a kind of experiment, and also an attempt to pacify the girl. He felt a truly strange and inhuman sensation, however, as he expected. Guanshou still didn't understand. Was this really how they tested their hunches? If Guanshou was indeed the undead of these places, it was most likely the delightful head that was described in Liao's tales. Just an arm and a head with no body in sight. Just one solid wall with no need for battle. Guangshou's body was like a prosthetic she used to impersonate a human. It looked like Guangshou could control it freely as long as her head was attached. Besides, if Liao's records were correct, one arm of Guangshou's should belong to the main body. The girl asked for her peculiarities to be explained to her, but as soon as it happened, she got angry thinking that this perverted, lecherous sex maniac wanted to do something to her. It was cruel, but that's what women are, even if they were foul. But Chang Zai-Kui seemed to have realized something else. Guanshou's head was misleading her enemies as much as her arm was her true body. Guangshou got even more angry. It was likely that Chang Zai-Kui's assumption was absolutely correct, but something was strange. The girl pushed him away with her head, but smashing through the window panes, he was still falling somewhere. Thanks to this fall, he finally realized what had happened. This whole Moonrise place is a huge mess. It seemed as if he was about to spit on the cold asphalt of the night city. But the tentacles of uncleanness wouldn't let him. It had all happened extremely quickly, but nevertheless, he was now safe and at Moonrise. There was nothing wrong with fooling around at Moonrise from time to time, but Jian Ren really wanted Chang Zai-Kui and Guangshou to finally get along. And in order to make it happen much faster, Mistress decided that these two should be together tonight. Both of them were not happy with the idea, but going against Madame's will was no way to go. Guangshou had to bring Chang Zai-Kui his own room. Upon entering this room, the boy looked at it with delight, but it didn't even remotely resemble a room of unholiness. But Guanshou was not going to listen to this. She immediately locked the room in a flash, which took the guy by surprise. Maybe now this room will start to remind him of a normal room. Only now was not the right time to play. Chang Zai-Kui could feel the anxiety building up. He should have been more careful. But since the girl wasn't going to back down and he had to use his blitz, she didn't have enough strength to resist it, so she was completely at the mercy of Chang Zai-Kui. It was the right time to absorb the anxiety. This counterattack might have worked if it wasn't for the difference in strength with Guangshou. From high to low, the ranking of the uncleanness was based on the horror class, in the danger class, the death class, and the bloodshed class. After the body host entered into symbiosis, it became the junior leader of the uncleanness, and could handle bloodshed on its own. Guanshou was only in charge of support and communication, but it was worth it to give in to her own will. The actual level of foulness would reach a deadly level. Guangshou's head broke away from her body and remained in the wall of the room, as well as her arm. With such ability and strength, Chang Zai-Kui was expecting any attack from her. But alas, he was not too vigilant. His early findings were correct. Guangshou could indeed pass through walls and manipulate inert materials to which she was bound. But what could this knowledge have given him? It seemed as if the torment would continue and objects would fall on him one after another. Guangshou didn't have the purpose of finishing off Chang Zai-Kui. It was just a greeting ceremony at the Netherworld. Clarification of the state through force. They were the controllers of the unclean. Total victory was the truth that was known to all the unclean. Chang Zai-Kui may have gotten approval from Lady Jianren, but Guangshou was choosing to completely avoid any scrutiny. But only Chang Zai-Kui was not going to give in to these checks and conquest tricks. And as soon as the opportunity arose, he used Blitzkrieg. His ability was unique in that Blitzkrieg appeared not only from his arm, but from any part of his body. However, if necessary, it could also come out of an eye. This kind of resistance impressed Guanshou, but until he matched his stubbornness, he couldn't even count on them sleeping together in one. The next day, a new morning came. Jianren decided to stop by to say hello. After all, the previous night was simply delightful. It seemed to be only for Madame. Chang Zai-Kui's night was very disturbing and clearly not delightful. Chang Zai-Kui would prefer to lie down on that clumsy sleeping bag rather than hang in it. Finally, when everyone was finally awake and met at the dinner table, the lady tried to find out what had happened to them last night. There was no result. Everyone was silent. Jianren was very concerned about this. And if Guangshou made Chang Zai-Kui sad, then the lady wanted to apologize on her behalf. Yesterday during the test, something happened that worried Guangshou very much. To make it extremely clear what happened, Jianren asked to show Chang Zai-Kui this. Guangshou didn't refuse in this, even though she had to undress a bit. After all, that would be the only way to see that hole. One of the foul men had always been by her side, but he had slipped away despite all the girl's concern for him. What surprised the guy the most was the fact that she had an unclean thing under her breasts. But what was that thing? It was the mistress who decided to continue. for it was the foul thing they had discovered at the meeting place yesterday. This cute octopus-like creature was called Naru, and he was a particularly curious foul thing. Jian Ren didn't anticipate that she would have to keep an eye on it, so she just left it in Guangshou's arms. But is Chiang Zai-Kui willing to help the lady correct her mistake? He seemed only too glad, for it was a job he'd accepted, but once they got everything done, Chiang Zai-Kui really hoped that he would have a chance to touch Naru's little hands. Before acting, Chiang Zai-Kui wanted to find out where this beast dwelt, because that way there was a chance of getting on its trail. Guanshou was not averse to saying so, well asked to do so as soon as possible. Surprisingly, the girl didn't even resist Chiang Zai-Kui getting her body in. As soon as he touched, he felt that her artificial body was very realistic and soft. It was actually Guanshou's handiwork, something she was proud of. As soon as he reached deeper in there, he felt an octopus. Chiang Zai-Kui immediately realized that it was Naru. After all, even for an imp, he was very unusual. There was an awkward pause between the two of them. Guanshou knew that she should apologize to Chiang Zai-Kui, as she had caused him so much trouble by venting her sadness. It was hard for her to apologize, so the silence continued for a few more minutes. It was as if she was waiting for some words, like, "It's no big deal," or "Don't worry, it's fine," but she didn't, and then she got even more mad. Guangshou was expecting an indulgence from Chiang Zai-Kui. Besides, she knew a little about human etiquette. But why didn't she use it? In her opinion, people were always looking for profit and had evil intentions. She understood people, so she couldn't relax around them. For example, people were supposed to be afraid of uncleanness, but nevertheless, some people were fascinated by uncleanness. And Guangshou kept asking this question, why is this so? This question made Chiang Zai-Kui remember his past when he was abandoned, when his girlfriend reassured him that he hadn't done anything wrong. Those were not the best memories. But soon, as if they were gone, he decided to answer the question that was hanging in the air. It was the fact that some guys had good taste that usually made people sympathetic to unclean things. Or maybe because bullies like Chiang Zai-Kui don't have friends? And Guangshou was absolutely right. In any case, the girl was ready to help the guy, because in the process of management, people often pose the greatest threat to the unclean. Thanks to transportation, they could travel without any problems and arrived at their desired location. Chiang Zai-Kui couldn't sense the disturbances here, but he could sense the impurities. He had no physical ability to communicate with them. However, the creature looming over him already knew everything. Guangshou tried to follow Chiang Zai-Kui's gaze, but she couldn't detect anything and couldn't figure out what the guy meant by it. There was nothing left for her to do but follow Chiang Zai. This giant eye had appeared to him after he encountered the aura in Naru's nest. Ever since then, Naru was interested in nature. He usually just went wherever his eyes looked. They ran but were forced to stop by someone's shriek. The girl lay under the fence and screamed with the fear that Naru had instilled in her. Guanshou immediately noticed her pet and ran after him. Probably in all the time Chiang Zai-Kui had never seen a girl so happy. Only this happiness didn't last long, because Naru ran away from his mistress. The video angle shifted. One would think it was Naru's dodging ability. No wonder Guanshou couldn't control it. Well, as for this man, she was shocked that she and other people met this monster. This monster had come for her beetle nuts. She couldn't hide her disappointment that all her nuts had been eaten and not by her. Betel nuts were a spiritual sustenance that the stranger could never find time to enjoy, and they were also used as a tonic. They were chewed together with quicklime and pieces of katechu palm seeds. After reassuring the girl that Chiang Zai-Kui didn't need them, the guy wondered. After all, Jian Ren had mentioned earlier that Naru was attracted to different things, and this time, he was curious to try the nuts. The girl still couldn't get over the fact that she had met such a horrible monster, because she couldn't even think about it. She tried to find support in the person of Chiang Zai-Kui, but she didn't find it. The guy was of a different opinion and pretended not to see them at all. Upon realizing this, she awkwardly apologized, for she had come this far and thought she had met someone who also sees uncleanness like her. Chiang Zai-Kui understood this girl as well as anyone, because he had to face the same things as her. Absolutely everyone judged him, called him a freak and an outcast, and questioned whether he was a human being at all. But it was really only those people who were weird and here. A certain gentleman had been looking for the girl for a long time and finally found her, shouted loudly, pointing at her. Without hesitation, he immediately ordered her capture. This girl ran away from the orphanage so often that it scared them to death. She tried to resist because her nuts hadn't been eaten yet, even though the caretakers thought they were a bad influence on the girl and she shouldn't eat them. Guangshou finally returned from her search, trying to understand what had happened. To make them focus on that girl, He simply replied that she was mentally ill and should not be compared to him. Hoping that they wouldn't bother anyone else, the guys decided to continue their search for Naru. But the Lord watched them carefully and realized that this guy had called that foul thing Naru. This led him to some speculation, so he decided to follow Chang Zai Kui. He hoped that he could just sit back and harvest. Finally catching up with Naru, our boys lost sight of him again in a remote alleyway of eateries. Has he developed an interest in human food? It wasn't lunchtime, which meant the guys could take the initiative to get Naru out of there. It was just a matter of deciding what kind of food to lure Naru out. The plan was, now Guangzhou should go ahead and talk to the salesman. But what about Chiang Zai-Kui? He was now like a savage going shopping for the first time in a year. If he knew how to get along with the undead, it didn't mean he was also good with humans. Everyone had their own pros and cons, and this was called working with one's strengths. Chang Zai spoke very convincingly, but he also clung to Guangzhou. Since it was decided, Guangzhou was fine with going forward. Her prosthetic human body was just right for the situations where she encountered people. She had always been bad with her body, but now she was ready to show off her best skills. The success of her deeds was to start by addressing the man as boss. She wanted to just order a portion of fried chicken, but the man had an opinion of her as a polite girl. The deed was done. Guangzhou managed to order a portion of chicken, which she was overjoyed about. Plus, it was even more satisfying that this bait worked. He was already watching his kin and was most likely contemplating the question of how he could steal the food. Trying not to give himself away, Chang Zai-Kui tried to look as inconspicuous as possible, but Naru realized that he had been exposed, so he continued to hide further. The food they chose didn't seem to suit Naru. The smell of fried chicken was too fresh. Perhaps they should have tried something with a more pungent odor? The dish that came to his mind was laksafen. It is rice noodles with river snail. A Chinese noodle soup that has a pungent, unpleasant odor that can fill the weight of a restaurant and even the surrounding streets. The flavor of the laksafen was identified as intense rather than pungent. It blended rich notes of soy sauce with warm hints of ginger and garlic, creating an attractive bouquet of flavors. It was felt strongly, especially when the dish was just cooked. Chang Zai-Kui, this scent seemed quite appealing. Guangzhou was of a different opinion. However, the important thing is that Naru likes it. Spitting on his privacy, he literally climbed out onto the table and watched this dish. But he didn't eat it. Chang Zai-Kui screwed up and apologized for it. He remembered how Naru had run away from him the first time they met. There was nothing more exciting or frustrating, maybe even dangerous, than that encounter. It all happened because Naru saw someone feeling a strong attraction to her, which was introduced by Naru's madness. When people are full, they are relaxed. So Naru went where the food smelled. Naru wasn't looking for food, but for a relaxed atmosphere. Guangzhou was even taken aback by this kind of talk. She found it awkward that they were discussing it here. Guangzhou's job was to figure out the undead among the crowd. They hadn't known each other for a long time, but Chang Zai-Kui understood how difficult this was for Guangzhou, so suggested the girl relax for the day and have some human food. She couldn't relax because, first of all, she didn't understand why he was doing this, and secondly, she was very embarrassed. Chang Zai-Kui knew why he was doing this. He really wanted to change this tense atmosphere between them and finally improve their relationship. Guangzhou was embarrassed like a little girl, but finally still dared to confide in a person for the first time. The fried chicken was clearly delicious, at least much tastier than the luosafen. But what appealed to her most was the situation at hand. Now Naru too did not find Chang Zai-Kui as intimidating as before. This time he began to look at him from a different perspective. He started to like it so much that his body was enveloped by the transformation. The monster, which previously seemed to be a simple octopus, turned into an incredibly beautiful girl. Like a very small child, she was rubbing the edge of Chang Zai-Kui's t-shirt with her hand. She couldn't speak and only mouthed the words Ru or Rua, hinting at being fed law siphon, to think that Naru had managed to transform. Chang Zai-Kui and Guangzhou were simply shocked. The unclean lord told Guangzhou that Naru's transformation showed about her understanding of things. She transformed after the others were enchanted. If the girl remembered correctly, before Naru's transformation was a deep impression of the backside of her soul. But how will the little girl's appearance affect Chang Zai-Kui? Naru began to get attention in her own way and squeak in her own language. Chang Zai-Kui was a self-proclaimed Bizarro telepath, but at the moment he didn't understand what Naru was saying. His knowledge wasn't enough with that level of empathy, but wasn't mind reading a superpower? An average person like Chang Zai-Kui could do it. Guangzhou was thinking now. If Chang Zai-Kui was the most normal person on Earth, didn't that mean that there were no normal people left on the planet? The adults were each absorbed in their own thoughts, and were not paying attention to Nara in any way, so she decided to act, licking Chang Zai-Kui's finger. The guy was completely bewildered and didn't understand why she did that. But finally exhaling and as if surrendering, he decided to feed the little one from his hands. Like a newly hatched chick, she was eating noodles from Chang Zai-Kui's hands. But she didn't even have time to swallow the noodles before the threads that bound her body pulled her back. The guys managed to get this Bizarro to get rid of his defense, but end up regretting it. The stranger following them, however, was extremely grateful and appreciative. Chang Zai-Kui was surprised that there was still some person who could see Naru. Before and after the transformation, ordinary people wouldn't be able to see any monsters, but that was also the whole problem. Chang Zai-Kui was not a member of the lunar community, but he could see traces of the Bizarro. Therefore, Chang Zai-Kui and Guan Shou were decided to take Chang Zai-Kui and Guan Shou with them. They weren't going to give up just like that. But Chang Zai-Kui wanted to understand what was going on, so he demanded an explanation from Guang Shou. This story was a long one, so Guang Shou promised to tell her when they got back. The girl had never thought that they would run into these fiends here. The only thing she could say now was that they were sworn enemies, and before she left, she was going to teach them a lesson and save Naru. Naru wasn't a gutless puppet either. She was trying to make some choices, plus her campaign solution was leaking. As a consequence of Chang Zai-Kui discovering this agitation solution, he could now fully utilize his strength. The scientist and his team had certainly not envisioned this outcome, and were now enveloped in tentacles that, with more pressure, could strangle them. It seemed as if it really couldn't be. But the stranger dared to assume that Chang Zai-Kui was not a human, but also a Bizarro. But it seems like Chang Zai-Kui overestimated these people. These people didn't even have guns. They didn't pose any threat to the guys. But they had one specialty. These people had their eyes modified so they could see the Bizarro. The little girl was upset, because the whole evening was ruined. But Chang Zai-Kui promised that he would help her return the solution later. These scumbags didn't come here on foot either, but in a hospital car. Guan Shu noticed that there is a confirmed mental patient in this car. It was clear that those who were caught by this group were not ordinary people. And besides, she, the girl in the car, could be a victim too. The terrified mental patient climbed out of the car, as if fearing someone would attack her. But after realizing that everything was fine, and that all of her enemies were already out or dead, she rushed to them to avenge her beetle nuts that they had taken. When she spotted the monster, she realized that someone had managed to catch her after all. Just the mere mention of Naru being a monster made Chang Zai-Kui angry, and every time, he would enter the argument and defend Naru. But the stranger didn't care much about that. According to her favorite habit, she continued chewing her beetle nuts. But they weren't just any nuts. She'd be so defensive and lash out at everyone for them. These nuts granted her a huge mouth, her jaw replaced by a weapon that was as good as her mouth. This crazy girl's target was not Chang Zai-Kui. I was more interested in the defenseless Naru. In any case, Chang Zai-Kui stood up for the innocent girl and protected her. But frightened by the whole situation, she turned back into a monster. She was much safer in her first form, because thanks to it she could hide in Guan Shou's body. Once Naru was safely crazy, no longer had anyone to attack, it was time to talk. I cared a lot. Why had the guy lied to her? Chang Zai-Kui could see the monsters, but he fooled her last time. Why? To get something out of it, he agreed that he really hadn't seen them before. But now things had changed. But those words sounded like an insult. After their first meeting, the girl knew that they were bound by the threads of the past. Had she managed to assume that she was similar to Chang Zai-Kui? This whole conversation made Chang Zai-Kui very tense. He was even disgusted at the thought that he and this maiden might have something in common. Quietly watching, Guang Shou realized that the stranger was also from the Moon Corporation. That same damned bunch of people who would never stop hunting Bizarro and trying to revive the moon. Especially now, the transformation of that A-level madwoman that surpassed the strength of that entire armed mob. Guang Shou felt obligated to intervene in this matter, but Naru was very calm now, needed to do something. If the enemy was stronger than Guan Shou, it was unlikely for her to save everyone. Chang Zai-Kui would be better off running right now, after all. This was all they could do right now. But he didn't even think about retreating, because he had a blitzkrieg. The opponent didn't think of giving up either, for the forces were on her side. Her ability was a chattering Arla Thurskai. Their two natural abilities clashed in the same battle against each other. Maybe Chang Zai-Kui was wrong to go up against that girl? Her ability also included opportunity, accession, she bet. The third eye had already noticed the super-dense neurotoxins, but there was no way to stop. Everything was going more or less normally. He struggled as hard as he could, but at some point he found himself in a space unknown to him. It was completely empty, as if he were in space. In the midst of this void, A woman's scream that he had heard once before was heard. The girl was about to be attacked by monsters. This girl was familiar to him. She asked again if Chang Zai-Kui could see monsters. She prayed for him to save her because she didn't want to die. It might have seemed unbelievable from the girl's side, but Chang Zai-Kui was completely puzzled. He didn't understand what kind of monster he was talking about. What's going on with this girl anyway? Was she really trying to draw attention to herself like this? It wasn't like that. At least she denied it, and tried to convince the guy that she would never try to get attention that way. Chang Zai was even more disgusted by this girl. She had already made a reputation for herself, and did she really expect such dirty tricks to work on him now? She infuriated him so much that Chang Zai-Kui was ready to grease her to the ground, for he didn't see a shred of humanity in her. For a moment, a realization came to him. He just tried to realize what had just happened. Chang Zai-Kui didn't do any of this, which meant it was all an illusion. Besides, it's just a scene with him in it. The stranger kept waiting for the guy to finally discern the game. This misunderstanding had been their main problem from the beginning. Chang Zai-Kui was frightened upon seeing his opponent, and tried to immediately call a blitzkrieg. It didn't work out, and he had nothing to worry about. They were safe here, and no one could hurt them. She hoped for understanding from Chang Zai-Kui, for he, like her, sympathized with all Bizarros, and besides, they were peers. She wanted the guy to accept her proposal so they could become one. Together, they will be able to kill those monsters that oppressed them. Their confrontation was far beyond the boundaries of consciousness. From the outside in reality, it looked something like this. They joined together, and at the same time fell asleep. No one watching could even guess that there was another battle going on. Guangzhou didn't know the opponent's strength, but she saw that this was a great chance to end things. While she was pondering why they had stopped, Naru popped out of her den and there was nothing the girl could do to stop it. Naru decided to take matters into her own hands, or rather, her own tentacles. Chang Zai-Kui is a man who has had the ability to see strange creatures since birth. All his life about her had been around him and other people, but only he had seen them. At times, he noticed these creatures picking fights with each other, and sometimes these events clung to people. At first, our protagonist was a perfect terror, but eventually he was confronted with the existence of more horrible monsters. That day, it seemed to him that it would be better for him to disappear. These flashbacks, they were so strange. Why was he remembering that day? He still remembered everything that had happened since then. Completely wrapped up in hypnosis and his memories, Chang Zai-Kui saw the one who had managed to awaken him. Sensing that the victim was beginning to regain consciousness, the madwoman stopped feeding. Naru. This monster was like an angel from heaven at this moment, who had been sent to rescue Chang Zai-Kui. The atmosphere was a bit restless, which she could note for herself. But on the other hand, there was also a serene atmosphere, which seemed nice to her. But it was probably ironic. This place is the mental realm of this madwoman. Finally, the critical moment has come to eat Chang Zai-Kui. Of course, she couldn't allow herself to be thwarted in her takeover of the victim. Very interesting. To Chang Zai-Kui, she almost organized a full meal, but she decided to devour the girl entirely. What an injustice. But perhaps the stranger was just ticked off. Naru could feel it all too well. And actually, crazy was just hard to deal with more than one person at a time. In any case, she couldn't miss such a tidbit. So she decided to devour the girl. It seems it wasn't that easy. Naru was literally out of this monster's league. Like a butterfly freed from its cocoon, Naru ripped open the madwoman's mouth as if it had cost her nothing. While the meat from the jaws was still flying around, Naru decided to make something with it. She got the perfect eyeball-sized balloon. Due to this, the madwoman could not regain her tongue. Her mouth was completely destroyed, but a few fangs remained. With the hope that maybe the balloon would do some good, Naru ostentatiously began to swallow it. Only it wasn't tasty at all, and the girl had to spit it out. Either way, she sensed a mixed flavor of human and creature. It meant that she was facing a mutant human who had consumed many creatures. It was lousy. But on the other hand, if Naru didn't eat that crazy woman, she couldn't get her darling back. While this semblance of a human was trying to realize the fact that she had been wounded in her own subconscious, Chang Zai-Kui was trying to break free from her grasp. She had never met monsters like Naru before. Confident in her victory and in her subconscious, she wasn't expecting any tricks, so she didn't reinsure herself beforehand. Slowly, Naru came closer than she was scaring the crazy woman. Naru was just a monster that couldn't be defeated in the mental realm. No wonder this psychopath was now afraid of her. But what about reuniting together? Naru had no doubt that this girl would like that. Finally waking up in real life, she startled and began to touch her tongue, which was no longer there. At the same time as her, Chang Zai-Kuei also woke up, but he still didn't quite understand how he had destroyed her. Being near Naru hurriedly explained everything to him. After all, just now this psychotic had crushed his psyche. But now everything was fine. As payment, Naru asked him to keep everything. Naru managed to see Chang Zai-Kuei's pest. It was very tasty, surprisingly. During this entire time, not only did Chang Zai-Kuei not utter a word, he couldn't even blink. The aftermath of this battle had taken its toll. Guangshou was extremely worried and tried to call out to Chang Zai, but he still didn't answer her or even respond to her. But the sound that Naru usually made attracted both of them and pulled Chang Zai-Kuei out of the space. The girl once again pretended as if she couldn't speak and made Ru-like sounds. It was clear that she was very worried. But Chang Zai-Kuei couldn't understand what had just happened. Besides, was Naru a great eye or a separate being? He kept guessing and trying to determine which was his fantasy and which was reality. But whatever it was, Naru was the most phenomenal girl he'd ever met. Back in his territory, Chang Zai-Kuei decided to help his monster by putting, shall we say, something resembling boots on her. It should have been enough, but it would get in the way a bit while walking. From now on, it will never be lost, even outside of moonrise. To Chang Zai-Kuei, it was nothing. The most important thing was to make her happy, and then he would be happy too. But what was the surprise on the part of Guangshou and Naru? For that, Jinren was satisfied, and this was all because Chang Zai-Kuei was able to handle his task. This was the first time Jinren could observe a human getting along with a Bizarro like this. Jinren was afraid that this attitude might end very soon, but it turned out that Chang Zai had surprised her more than she had anticipated. According to stories and legends, humans have harmed a multitude of creatures, and also often kept them in fear. The same snakes were once victims of human scorn. But snakes are actually very timid and cautious. They defended themselves against anyone who was in the vicinity. Some people could live in harmony with snakes if they understood them. The sparrows were also considered one of the 4 pests, and now it's being talked about all over the world. People feared the white muzzles and long legs of spiders, yet they remained those that did little or no harm to humans. The predominance of rationality over fear is the pinnacle of human development. That's why Chang Zai-Kuei understood the Bizarro perfectly. This method helped them to exist without harming each other. But Guangshou was of a different opinion. After all, creatures are dangerous because doing harm is embedded in their instincts. If the fact that they were harming humans couldn't be stopped. Did Chang Zai-Kuei believe that it was possible to get along with humans? Guangshou had already answered this question, for she herself had just recently spoken about some aspects of humanity. If such a question arises, won't people fight? People won't stop until they draw a line of blood. But one couldn't say that about everyone. Were the creatures so dangerous that even Chang Zai-Kuei wouldn't be able to handle them? Jinren was a perfect example that she never shirked her duties. She always took in dangerous creatures and looked after them. After all, it was her duty. Chang Zai-Kuei was not left alone by the gang of guys who had attacked them today. He doubted the right decision, or rather, he doubted whether they had done the right thing in leaving them there. That gang, maybe they went through something like the moon takeover? That crazy girl survived, but she probably thought she would have been better off dead. The stranger called her his knight for some reason, but he was extremely ashamed of the girl's defeat, and not only him. After all, this defeat was a huge disgrace to the capture of the moon. When Lord Baron first saw this girl's pretty face, it was completely different. Now he didn't even want to hear her excuses. She wasn't even 12 years old when beetle nuts made her lips dry, bullying destroyed her body, and drugs paralyzed her mind. Moreover, she was desperate and unable to control her life, and Lord Baron saved her. Not only did he cure her of the Bizarro influx, but he also gave her a lot of power. The Lord had high hopes for her account. They were to repair the creatures and take possession of them. Under his leadership, not to mention the barons and viscounts, the girl had the opportunity to become the Duke of Capture the Moon. The Lord had given her enough and even a lot to accomplish all of this. But in return, he only asked for one thing. Don't screw up. How could the girl betray him after that? How could she lose all the power the Lord had given her? She almost didn't have the strength to speak, but somehow she squeezed out an apology and asked for another chance. But this girl was just a pawn and of no value, which, by the way, the Lord will have many more. Resources were being extracted too slowly, and this was undermining the progress of lunar exploration. The Bizarros were evil and dangerous. Simply put, they were enemies to humanity, as the Lord believed. The ability to convert resources into energy is the best fate for these things. The ultimate human mercy. The moonrise, led by the creatures, was to fall. This world was to belong to the new order taking over the moon. That was the goal of the Lord and his companions. The Lord was ready to destroy anyone who dared to stand in his way or was in any way displeasing. Besides, he already had a picture of the one who dared to destroy his knight. The Lord desired a meeting, a personal meeting, with this traitor to humanity. From the unusual days of the worker with the evil, our protagonist had to still return to the usual school routine of a high school student. He didn't like school because he had no allies there. Everyone whispered and schemed about him on the sidelines and called him some kind of detached person. It was said of him that he had signed an agreement with the school. That is, his attendance would not be taken into account during exams, though it was out of order, even in a private school, and also unfair to the other students. Jealousy still had a place in the brains of high school students. In addition, ever since his enrollment in this school, Chang Zai-Kuei has been ranked first in everything and always, no matter where he participated. This newcomer immediately took Chang Zai-Kuei as his free star. He suddenly wanted to see what this oaf could do. But before going for a showdown, the girl stopped him. Chang Zai-Kuei was the best in PE. He even surpassed the teacher's strength. Everyone knew it. Therefore, the classmate advised the newcomer to ignore Chang Zai-Kuei, and for good reason. There were rumors that he was constantly bullied by his classmates as a child. Those kids ended up going missing. As much as the lady thought that Chang Zai-Kuei needed to respect his human origin, he could consider searching for creatures as a part-time job, but put his life as a human first. Thanks to Jin Ren's guidance, Moonrise follows the path of harmonious coexistence. If people were to completely unite with the Moonrise, it would be contrary to the lady's intention to invite them. Well, now it was time to get back to the information about lunar exploration. Guangzhou was to contact Chang Zai-Kuei as soon as he had a moment. In short, if it wasn't for Lady Jin Ren, it was unlikely that Chang Zai-Kuei would have returned to school, so talking to his colleague was something he had time to do. The case was about Moon Capture. Moon Capture was a human organization, not previously publicized. There was an unknown date of its founding, maybe decades, maybe centuries ago. Absolutely all of the members of the Moon's takeover are human, but they were not purebloods. They hunted the undead, trying every possible way to take their powers. Chang Zai-Kuei guessed that the members of the Moon Capture were human-creature hybrids. The limbs and strength of the creatures were surgically transplanted onto human bodies. This is how the capture of the Moon treated the undead. This meant that those creatures who had had their limbs and powers taken away, those unfortunate creatures were considered a mere resource and discarded as trash. The capture of the Moon was based on a strict system of imperial titles from highest to lowest. They were subdivided into dukes, marquis, counts, viscounts, and barons. That woman must not have been a baron, but taller than the knight who had just joined the Moon Grab. Strength isn't a determining factor for status in the Moon Capture, but it's unlikely to be able to handle a knight, let alone a titled member of the Moon Capture. If it happens that, for example, Chang Zai-Kuei has to face capture, he must immediately retreat. Those words were like a nightmare that he woke up from. But there was something wrong in the classroom, like there was a power outage. It got very dark, although it should normally be brighter at this time and also very noisy. There was no one at the desks, only notebooks, and someone's belongings. The classroom was completely deserted, as if everyone had been snatched away by aliens. Chang Zai-Kuei heard no one, and there were no sounds at all. The school was completely empty. All that was left was him and another lord. Chang Zai-Kuei guessed that this lord had come specifically to him to take revenge. But he didn't understand why the opponent had chosen such a place. After assessing Lord Chang Zai-Kuei's appearance, he concluded that he was facing the head of the lunar capture. The head was very flattered that the young man had realized so quickly who he was. The lord was finally convinced that this boy was unusual. It turned out that he hadn't come for revenge. The lord was very grateful to Chang Zai-Kuei for helping him regulate his losses by getting rid of weak ties in advance. But Chang Zai-Kuei didn't find it a big deal. It was nothing to him. So he asked the head to get the hell out of here. But the lord didn't even think about that. He needed people, and the lack of helpers was very frustrating. The lord was making Chang Zai-Kuei a very generous offer to join the capture of the moon and take that woman's place. The people from Luna's takeover were a pain in the ass too. But he didn't care either way, and he wanted to say goodbye to that turkey as soon as possible. Only one thing Chang Zai-Kuei didn't realize was that it wasn't a suggestion. It was a threat. Until our hero agrees to this proposal, people will be killed one by one. It became clear why the school was so quiet and no one was there. The lord had taken over the entire school and was holding people hostage to threaten Chang Zai-Kuei. But why should Chang Zai-Kui care about their insignificant lives? These people were just a meaningless crowd to him. For a moment, he was taken by surprise. But at the same time, he saw the young schoolboy as a worthy adversary or possible ally. The Lord really liked Chang Zai-Kui's answer. After all, this was exactly what was needed for a moonsault. But if the guy was breaking that comedy, how could the Lord think of letting his guard down? Of course, he was very eager to test the young man. This flash of sudden light from the Lord blinded the lad's eyes. But when the flash of light disappeared and he could see normally, Chang Zai-Kui found no one nearby. He tried to look around every corner to find the missing Lord. But there was no way he could feel that the Lord was already near his foot. Yet, the Lord caught him off guard because he couldn't even understand where the one had come from. But in any unclear situation, Chang Zai-Kui would summon his Blitzkrieg. Before he could even use this power, the opponent was behind him. Perhaps his goal was to find out what power the Moonrise had given him. A blitzkrieg of so-called excited particles. But it wasn't like Gen's power. There are worlds between the Lord's strength and Chang Zai-Kui's strength, which the Lord, in fact, was now proving by clear example. This power. Long tentacles wrapped around Chang Zai's body, thus forming something like a strong and elastic rope. Compared to Moonrise's strength, Chang Zai-Kui was indeed unleveled to this Lord. Chang Zai-Kui someone tried to call, but seeing this, the Lord immediately destroyed the phone, not wanting a third extra. Baron Egan disliked it most of all when others poked their noses into his business and turned the tables. Deceit after deceit, excuse after excuse. Was it really all just for his own gain? Why not just take over the world and turn it into a place where you can do whatever you want without those things? But what in the world was Baron Egan going to do with Chang Zai-Kui? Without any lies, the Lord answered extremely honestly, for in this world, he would gain control over Chang Zai-Kui, and once he gets control of it, he'll claim the power for a lunar takeover. But all his ambitious dreams and aspirations were interrupted. Did he realize that Chang Zai-Kui was someone like an evil spellcaster? Even though the Lord had transplanted them and changed their appearance in a human body, the fact that they were Bizarro remained unchanged. Now their powers were equal and not that much different from each other. All the difference was that the Lord controlled the power of uncleanness a little more skillfully. Baron Egan was confident that his strength should have been able to smash this guy to smithereens. Now he was backed into a corner because Chang Zai-Kui had found his chances. The Lord didn't make it difficult for Chang Zai-Kui in any way. Luckily he had a good academic record, and he was also very good at creatures. Did Baron Egan know this before he ran around the world doing whatever he wanted? From cutting off the electricity and creating flashes of light from sources to releasing tentacles from outlets, it was nothing like Zheng's strength. The Lord himself reminded Chang Zai-Kui that their powers were similar. Baron Egan still doubted his words. He couldn't believe what was happening and couldn't adapt to the situation. So he continued to threaten the young man that he couldn't leave. If a pathetic mutant like Baron Egan could leave, why couldn't Chang Zai-Kui? The particle barrier on Chang Zai-Kui's body was completely destroyed. This gave him the ability to shoot. Lord made two mistakes in this fight. The first was underestimating his opponent, and the second was not being able to adapt to the new events. If he had looked at the situation from a different perspective, the outcome might not have been so dire. No matter what, no one was allowed to stand in the way of Chang Zai-Kui's charged tentacles. Did the Lord think he could do whatever he wanted? But that was a mistaken belief, and his arrogance was his undoing. His human being lacked the fascination with creatures. Chang Zai-Kui pushed the Lord, and thus made him more than a little angry. Alas, it was so hard to contain the arrogance, but by provoking Baron Egan, he was probably only making things worse for himself. In that case, the Lord deemed him unworthy for the moon's capture. Therefore, he made the decision to turn Chang Zai-Kui into an expendable item. The wind flow of explosive electric current pushed Chang Zai-Kui away from the distance, thus sealing him into the wall. A mixture of excited particles was also detected, which the enemy used as a conductor. Chang Zai-Kui began to realize that the Lord could discharge lightning, but he also thought that the voltage would be higher. Egan had just devalued the particles but still used them without shame. After all, their powers shared a common nature. No matter what the Lord wanted, he wished with all his soul to deal with Chang Zai-Kui as soon as possible. But it seems this arrogant turkey had completely forgotten that the wires were on Chang Zai-Kui's side. It was enough for him to rip them in half as a short circuit occurred. This trick was too dangerous, but it was also genius. If you don't catch a second, you can get burned. Chang Zai-Kui simply grabbed this power, even though he was unfamiliar with thunder and lightning. It was an incredible risk and a desire to win at the same time. Basically, Chang Zai-Kui and Egan could match even in lightning resistance. But in terms of physical strength, the guy was inferior to the Lord. The opponent, thinking that Chiang Zai-Kuei had ruined himself in despair, was heading to the gym. It could be assumed that there were hostages in the gymnasium. Chiang Zai-Kuei had to do something urgent before this lord did something crazy. In all this time, the students didn't even try to escape because they were guarded by the Lord's sixes. Based on the noise outside, the wards had already assumed that the Lord had solved all the issues. But the energy conservation of this place was abysmal, so the Lord decided to take the hostages. The school children did not have the best feeling. They could only hope that they would not be killed. A classmate tried to calm her down because the girl was one of the most beautiful and slender students. Most likely these villains will just grab her and torture her. The classmate was very sorry, but there was no way he could comfort the girl otherwise, because such a fate did not please her at all. It was unexpected, but they decided to start with this guy. The Lord saw him as another strongman. The villain seemed to like the young man's big mouth, the girl expressing her silent reverence. Baron Egan needed these people to siphon energy out of them. One could see that the energy index was clearly demonstrated in his tattoos. As soon as he drained all the energy from the guy, he collapsed like a rag doll. But Baron Egan was filled with energy. Bioelectricity suited him better than batteries and power plant energy. It was unknown if this young man was alive or dead, but right now he was unconscious no matter how the girl woke him up. This young man's heart was no longer beating. And it was obvious because Baron Egan had taken away all of his bioelectric energy. The girl just didn't have the anger to express all her indignation. Tears came to her eyes and bad words came out of her mouth, but the Lord wasn't going to let it pass. The Baron was sure that this girl didn't even have the strength to resist. Besides, she didn't even deserve to become his dinner. But their sweet conversation was interrupted by Chiang Zai-Kuei's blitzkrieg. I wonder if it's bioelectricity that powerful, or if electromagnetism is stronger. Everyone knew Chiang Zai-Kuei some scum, and in normal peacetime would have been surprised by his arm. But right now, he was like a straw of salvation for them, and they were not surprised by his abilities, nor did they oppose them. Even though he didn't care about those classmates, he still didn't miss the opportunity to help them, because it wasn't difficult for him. His classmates' hearts began to beat thanks to Chiang Zai-Kuei's strength, but his life would not be the same now. The only one who wasn't happy about Chiang Zai-Kuei's appearance was Lord Egan himself. He was annoyed by these tricks from the books, or rather that the guy had tried them on him. But who are the creatures, from the Lord's point of view? Could it be a modified electrical power source? The Baron had no mystical creature charm, nor skill with electricity. He's just a power-hungry man who got special powers and thinks he's king. Such a suggestion initially made him laugh, but afterward, he prepared to respond not only with words, but with the new power he had absorbed from those same people. Anyone who underestimated Baron Egan had to die. It was his will. The situation was critical, but the girl felt more or less normal and realized that this tyrant was sucking the energy out of his subordinates. Will we now see Lord Egan's true power? His thunder sphere created a huge vortex in the gymnasium room. Slowly, Whirlwind headed towards Chiang Zai-Kuei, who was already ready to reply. There were many disciples near him who hid behind his back, so first of all he thought of their lives. Chiang Zai-Kuei was able to create a huge Faraday cage to protect everyone. A Faraday cage or shield is an enclosed space to prevent electromagnetic fields from passing through. The guy knew what he was doing. His Faraday cage did interfere with Baron Egan's reception, but how long could he last while ignoring his power? Soon the cage collapsed. The Lord counted on the fact that the young man would have no trump cards left and then he could defeat him. Already captured in the enemy's bindings, with the edge of his eye, Chiang Zai-Kuei noticed the pool. His head came up with an idea. He immediately dived into the pool. It didn't hurt him to drown, but even if he drowned, it was better for him just to burn the Lord's body, even if his life was at stake. The Lord's attitude towards Chiang Zai-Kuei was special, for to him, the guy was more than just expendable. Chiang Zai-Kuei was so amazed by this courtesy that he summoned his blitzkrieg. All the power of what the Lord was made of, he was sucked into the battery that was submerged in water. Proudly had so many questions along the lines of, how did the guy submerge the battery in water? Why did the water interfere with conduction? As it turns out, the mixture of excited particles is essentially its own unclean and can be used to form a watertight shield. And at this moment, Chiang Zai-Kuei had already cleared the pool of impurities and excited particles. Therefore, in the clear isolation water, the Lord could only move towards the concentrated mixture of excited particles. And if there are no impurities in there, then the Lord's powers will no longer allow it to turn into flesh. The second Lord Egan left his part of the Bizarro open to his opponent, that is, Chiang Zai-Kuei. The Lord's fate was sealed. This fight was for Chiang Zai-Kuei. Through his knowledge and courage, he was able to defeat the moon capture member that they were trying to protect him from. Thanks to brave human beings like Lord Aegon, Chang Zai-Kuei liked the creatures more and more. The Lord found himself in a place he missed dearly. The Baron of Moon Capture, Lord Aegon and this uncharted god together met Lady Jin Ren. The Lord had guessed before, but now he was convinced that Moonrise was covering for Chang Zai-Kuei. As soon as the Baron felt as if he was free, capturing Moonrise became part of his plans without fail. And afterward, even the Imperial of Moonrise would no longer be worth anything to him. Only with his powers. He's not likely to make it because he didn't have any. Jinren could actually see what Chang Zai-Kuei was telling her. In front of her was an ordinary person who was greedy for power and not a trace of substance. In that case, Jinren could easily deal with him. The man was completely confused because he knew that Bizarro powers were eternal. But now that power was gone and he didn't understand who could have taken them away, the lifespan of the creatures in the Lord's body far surpassed his. He couldn't help but live or die with it. One day he will be too old, and his human body will not be able to withstand this power. That power will just burn him to the ground. Such was the world that karma was present in absolutely everything, and Lady Jin Ren could only slightly accelerate this process. Baron Lord Aegon was getting what he earned. His body had completely turned into ashes, yet Jin Ren had a premonition that something would still happen. So she decided to close and keep her eyes closed. After all, if she suddenly watches it, she might not like the fact that she's seeing the end of the world with her own eyes. Finally, when it was over, Guangzhou and Chang Zai-Kuei could meet at Moonrise. Everything seemed to work out and resolved without any problems, but the girl never thought she would see the guy like this. He was depressed and completely emotionless, even when his favorite foul-mouthed person was around. But the thoughts of the past events wouldn't let him go, even though they were far behind him. It wasn't something bad that was hard for him to talk about, so he decided to talk about it. Once upon a time, a long time ago, Chang Zai-Kuei was poisoned for talking about the Bizarro phenomenon. He was attacked by mobs. When it happened, he thought he was going to die. At that moment, he felt fear for the first time since he was born. But at the same time, someone came to his rescue. This girl, like Chang Zai-Kuei, had seen the Bizarros and even understood them. Thanks to her, Chang Zai-Kuei had learned to assess the creatures so accurately. But one day, she just took off, just as suddenly as she had first appeared. Chang Zai-Kuei assumed that she left to change places. But as time went on, he just nailed it. And when Chang Zai-Kuei found out about the lunar capture, he thought that she had been kidnapped by them all these years. He didn't need any other reason. He wanted to get stronger so he could push further into the moon's grasp and learn of her whereabouts. Be that as it may, with his current skill level, Chang Zai-Kuei could barely handle their Baron. By choosing such a path, he constantly risked being ambushed by a moon grabber. Chang Zai-Kuei wasn't very good at communication, but humans and creatures also had something else in common. Humans and non-humans marked their position by force. There was no better way for people to get common sense than to beat it into them. Chang Zai-Kuei was willing to do anything as long as Lady Jin Ren showed him how to fight off the moon grip. Realizing that there was no way to dissuade the guy, the lady smiled easily. Moonrise had a place that would fulfill Chang Zai-Kuei's wish. Jin Ren was ready to show it to him. They found themselves in a vast space. It was the deepest place of the Moonrise. Here, each creature had its own reasons for living in isolation. Before continuing, the lady decided to remind the guy of the degree of danger of the unclean thing. The first degree was a rush of blood. It implied the ability to cause serious harm, or loss of blood. The second degree was death. It implied the ability to easily kill or consume the victim. The third degree is risk, the power to risk the world. The fourth degree was terror, a force that threatened the natural basis of the world. The least dangerous Bizarros were on the risk level. This place was the truest prison for Bizarros. The creature hovering over the lady was a shadow. She could materialize moments from the past. If left unattended, the shadow would subconsciously disrupt the passage of time, mixing the past and the present. But now she could help and bring Chang Zai-Kuei together with old friends. It was a corpse of the undead, but why bring it back? As far as we knew, it was all behind us. It wasn't just an undead corpse, it was Blitz's body. Lady Jin Ren's suggestion was this: to use the Bizarro that was inside Chang Zai-Kuei in order to better study the Blitz. The question became, what kind of creature did Chang Zai-Kuei see if he looked closely? Blitz could move around very easily, as if he had no bindings. This meant that at its core, the Blitz was not a parasite. It simply had to parasitize to survive. Chang Zai-Kuei could guess that Blitz was yearning for an independent rebirth. It could be said that the power of the master's insight was strange. For the sake of rebirth, Blitz was willing to rely on his master. But was Chang Zai-Kuei willing to enter this game for his own gain? He could take the remnants of the Blitz, but he would not give him any more of that power because Chang Zai-Kui must take possession of it and unleash his full power. Chang Zai-Kui trusted that girl, which meant he would be able to trust himself. The outcome of this game was unknown to him. But one thing Chang Zai-Kui had learned was that the game was worth the candle, and it could benefit everyone. Did Jinwen regard him as a human being like before? Absolutely yes. She could have sworn that when the Blitz absorbed enough nourishment for rebirth, Chang Zai-Kui would become the same person he had always been. Lady Jianren had already prepared a shadow for further challenge. The past materialized again through the power of the shadow. If the shadow-created past is not weaker, then this Baron Egan will have nothing new. Single-type abilities acted differently in different understandings. Against such a force, Chang Zai-Kui decided to use an electric wave, which burned Baron Egan to the ground again. If all the Paraludes in Moon Capture are as arrogant and uncaring as they are, then electric balls should have been enough for them. Due to the goal and the circumstances, the current task for the time being is the pursuit. But for later, saying goodnight, Chang Zai-Kui collapsed on his side along with his toy. Even forgetting that this bed wasn't his, it was Guan Shou's. Those girls, they won't let you sleep. Chang Zai-Kui and Blitz synchronized. If they were tracking non-creatures, wouldn't they need to deal with the moon grab? Why were they looking for a human? Chang Zai-Kui didn't want to deal with humans, but only Chang Zai-Kui knew this person. Lori was his classmate and Guan Shou needed her now. But it felt like the photo didn't tell him anything. He had no idea who it was, and this girl didn't even remotely resemble Loli. Chang Zai-Kui didn't know his classmates at all, and he also mocked their names like he did with Lady Jinren. As if giving up, Chang Zai-Kui decided to go ahead and talk. He didn't understand why Guan Shou needed this girl. After all, she wasn't even a Bizarro. But it seems that after Baron Egan's madness at the school, the moon capture wiped out the memory of everyone involved. The only one not found was this schoolgirl, and her whereabouts were still unknown. Lunar capture would not allow the public to know of the existence of the undead, so it was obvious they would want to erase the memory. Bizarro for a moon grab is kind of like a business secret. They'd rather monopolize the tech and data. If they do want to reveal the existence of the Bizarro, they will only do so when they have enough power to command the world. Only Chang Zai-Kui still didn't see the connection with Lori between this. Wouldn't it be better for the moon capture to find her and erase her memory? But lunar capture didn't have such a perfect memory wiping technique, so Moonrise's best opportunities were gone as it was. If lunar capture finds her again, they'll probably take her into the ranks of the lower staff as well, and then they'll start using her for bizarring experiments. Guan Shou was well aware of the fact that Chang Zai-Kui couldn't stand the way the lunar capture enslaved the undead, so the girl knew what to push for. After something like this, would Chang Zai-Kui really continue to sit back and watch as they enslaved not only the undead, but also humans? The next morning, Chang Zai-Kui was sent on a pursuit. But that didn't mean he had a gift for finding people. Of course he knew who was best at looking for people, so he decided to address the task to others. The police, of course. Never underestimate the police, so this time he relied on them. And while the police were looking for Lori, he decided to get some sleep in his own house. In a unified sleep style, human beds were more comfortable. You never know who's gonna end up on them. Lori has been found. Sleep is the best solution to any problem. Overjoyed that the assignment had been completed, he rushed to tell his guys, and of course offered to leave the girl to the cops. But before he would write to the police, Lori rushed to stop Chang Zai-Kui. First of all, she asked to listen to her. She realized that only Chang Zai-Kui was in the power to help her, but he was waiting for an explanation as to how Lori got into his house. First, to find Chang Zai-Kui's address, Lori checked the school magazine. Then she told the guard that she was Chang Zai-Kui's girlfriend and forgot the keys to his house, which is how she got here. In short, a typical girl who knew how to use her looks to control other people. But she was quick to bring his attention back to what happened 2 days ago. All the victimized teachers and students had been taken to the hospital. At first, Lori thought they needed to check on their condition. Lori had no idea it would turn out to be so much more complicated than that. Each injured person, depending on who was more injured, went into the doctor's office first. The girl's anxiety never ceased. She worried about her safety and the safety of others. Everything that happened, it seemed like a dream, and no one had ever seen Chang Zai-Kui afterward. Lori tried to talk to her classmate and find out a little more information, but the doctor rudely interrupted her so that the girl would keep quiet. But she didn't feel like talking anymore. When she saw the reflection of the man in the mirror, the first patient who entered had some strange long sticks stuck in his eyes, mouth, and ears. It was very painful, as evidenced by the patient's shrieking scream that echoed throughout the hospital corridor. But the man did not die, and the doctor ordered to start the next people. She did not want to miss anyone. How horrified Lori was then when she realized the danger she had created for the people. Instinctively, she had already gotten up and was about to leave. But would they let her go so easily?